So today, let's talk about these. Not one, but two modules from Omnitone. This is Rhythmi and this is Beatsi. Rhythmi is a semi-random drum sequencer. We're talking 5 channels for triggers and 1 CV out for pitch. Start at a bass pattern from 2 to 32 steps, add density, lean hits on or off beat with syncopation, add swing, raise the energy and evolve patterns, and then bring the energy back down when you need. This is a really cool approach for drum sequencing. Kind of like a more intentional version of Mutable Instrument Grids, which I don't have, but I have played with in Eurorack before. If drum sequencing is tricky for you, or you find you get stuck on the same beat for far too long in your jams, this might be a good option. It takes a lot of the thinking or math out of it, so you can just focus on really what you're hearing. Beatsi is Omnitone's love letter to modular drums. Mwah! It's got 5 voices, all digital, and it uses modular fundamentals of making drums from scratch. Envelopes, noise, wave shapes, harmonics, trigger delays, pitch decay, bit crushing, and a bit of ratcheting. It's got kick, snare, closed and open hi-hats, a tom which can definitely be used as a synth or a bass line, and a crash. The sounds have a little bit of range, but I bet they'll really shine with a little bit of processing, just like well-known classic samples. Oh, and you can connect these two together with a little jumper cable like this that comes with Beatsi, so they can be patched up without any cables. But the cool thing there is it doesn't restrict you from patching at all. It all comes down to the way that they handled the normally. It's really smart. Thank you to Omnitone for sending these along so I could show them to you. And for transparency's sake, no money changed hands and Omnitone gets to see this when you do. But also, Omnitone is close by and I recently got a chance to meet them in person and hang out a little bit. So there's that. More about that in a future video maybe? You can check out my terrible vlogging skills, I guess. So take that as you like. If you're new here, welcome. I make videos on modular stuff and try to keep it musical and informative. And yeah, they're not overly concise, but hopefully they're fun. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up so more people can see it. And subscribe if you want to see more from me. Before we get into the modules, I just have to mention this. Omnitone drew me a picture. A sweet little doodle. Actually, they always draw pictures, like these, based on a place near you. And it comes with little neuralies, with little thank you notes. This is a nice touch. But this one is pretty special to me. I think I'll frame it and put it on the wall in here. Maybe we'll have a little bit of story time in another video and I'll tell you why this is so special. Ooh, mystery. For now, let's get these two in the case and get drunk. I was gonna go right into a demo, but let's mess with Rhythmi and Beatsi first. Effects on bib, we'll start out pretty dry and then ramp up drive, reverb, and delay. I'm using some offset voltage from Happy Nerding 3X MIA and Spectral AO1. Nothing special, just voltage to CV Beatsi. All right, let's go. Alright, I gotta jump in here. I was not expecting this type of patch to be so much fun. Honestly, this is one of the last patches that I'm doing in prep for this video, but it's one that makes me realize there's way more potential behind these panels than I initially thought. This just shows two things. Letting modules kind of percolate as you learn them can yield some really wonderful results. And like I always say, module pairings are so important. Beatsi clearly shines going through some effects, and the drive from Bib is amazing with it. Utilizing offset voltage to control multiple parameters as performance macros is a blast. And Rhythmi shines as a chaotic, rhythmic beat composer. Controlling density and syncopation is clearly a strong idea. I haven't even told you about that. More about that in a sec. And changing the length as a performance control should not be overlooked. I know. I'm getting to a lot of reaction before I'm even telling you about the modules and how they work. So maybe we should get back to the demo. Let's go. Here we go. Rhythmi and Beatsi are in the case. They're connected on the back with that jumper, and I have Beatsi running out to 3x MIA, then to Bib. 3x MIA is for attenuation, and Bib just so it isn't fully dry. As you can see in Omnitone style, the lights on these modules are going to be fun. They've got that retro flare thing going, which I really love, and they always have a useful purpose. It's currently set to a 16-step pattern, and there's a clocking section up top here, outputs on the right. Crash, hi-hat, snare, tom CV, which will kick out pentatonic minor, and kick. This customized section down here is where you control the different parts of your beat. So that's triggers, gates, and CV. It's broken into density, syncopation or synco, and tom amount. Density is how many triggers will happen over the pattern, from none to all steps, in this case 16. Synco is the ratio of on-beat triggers versus off-beat or syncopated triggers. Off-beat triggers would be the ones right in between your on-beat ones. That'll make more sense in just a sec. The knob goes from none to an even amount of both to all off-beat triggers. This is a key for this module, with good reason. Drums often have a mix between on and off-beat hits for various feels and interest, and having control over that ratio per output is a big plus. This last knob is tom amount. So kind of like how dynamic tom pitches are from one to many. Think of it as having one tom versus like a lot of toms. Let me get on some headphones and then we can start hearing some stuff. Get this sorted. So if we start turning up the density of the hi-hats, we start hearing hi-hats in a pattern. All the way to the right, all steps are triggered. Notice the light strip indicating those triggers. Let's find a pattern in the middle. Okay, let's do the same thing with the snare and the kick. And find something we like. Cool. We can also add open hi-hats. Just turn up the density for that. And that actually sends out gates to the output instead of triggers. So definitely cool uses for that as a sequencer later. But for now, notice that Beatsi understands that gate as an open hi-hat. Okay, let's add some syncopation. Notice how the beat sounds very plain and almost like everything's just on beat? Well, that's because it is. Adding syncopation will make it more interesting. Let's turn it up in a couple places and you'll start noticing the effect. If we go past 12 o'clock, it starts removing the on-beat triggers. You can easily overdo this, but let's dial in something that works. Okay, and let's add some toms too. With synco for toms, and then add to that pitch range so it sounds like there's more than one tom. If we turn that all the way up, notice how it's generating a melody? Let's pull it back a little bit. Cool. Let's go back up to this clock section. There's in, reset, out, and an encoder for speed. Nothing's going in here right now, so that means that Rhythmi can clock itself. You can just adjust speed like this. Let's grab pulse from Noise Tools as clock. I have it over here on this case melt. Now, Noise Tools is controlling the clock. Cool. When this is getting an external clock, the speed encoder is a clock divider or multiplier. So turning the encoder, each click is going to divide down or multiply the clock. We go very fast, or very slow. This is very helpful, especially if you're clocking your case with a higher resolution clock. Rhythmi can take that into account and then also send another output at that clock speed. Oh, and if you press the encoder, the sequencer pauses and also saves. Down here is the global section. You can adjust length from 2 to 32 steps. With visual feedback, so I know that 16 is about there. Right above the global section, you have this progress strip, so you know where you are in the pattern and you know when it resets. There's swing. You can add a little bit or a lot. You can actually swing it so the triggers change places in the pattern, which is kind of wild and it gives it a really off-grid feel. So maybe useful for even ambient if you want. I mean, given how you can divide down the clock so much. These next two are really cool. Energy basically adds in triggers to all the outputs. So it just adds density to everything, which makes it feel more energetic. Then when you need, you can just reduce the energy again. If you go near full, where your indicator is red, it'll trigger a crash at the beginning of the pattern. Notice that there's a CV input for this parameter. It accepts plus minus 5 volts, but I think it can go up to 8. And the knob acts as an offset, so you're controlling where the CV is starting from essentially. Evolve kind of reminds me of Qubit Bloom, except this is for drums. You start down here at the bass, and if you turn it up, the beat changes to something similar, but different. The further you climb up the root, the more different it is. You can also jump to a different branch by pressing the encoder. This is at random, but with parameters to keep it more similar the closer you are to the root. And then you can also press and hold the encoder to go to a completely different bass pattern. I think there's 5 at the moment. Okay, let's take a look at Beatsi. We've been hearing it this whole time. There's inputs up top for kick, snare, hi-hat, tom CV, which will track both per octave and crash. Again, nothing's patched up because of that jumper on the back, so it just sends all the correlated outputs of the Rhythmi to Beatsi. But what happens if you use the inputs and outputs? Let me show you. Patching into the outputs of Rhythmi acts as a mult. So if I patch into snare, there's no change here, and the snare trigger is going out on this cable. And then if we were to patch into one of the inputs of Beatsi, it's going to override that input. So say if we did that on the kick. So now the kick and snare are happening at the same time. Same thing is happening for the hi-hat. We can also just use a dummy cable to break the normaling intentionally. With the way this functions, you have ultimate flexibility of the way that you want to patch. I was kind of hoping it would work this way, and it does. Nice work, Omnitone. Below the inputs is the grid, which serves a bunch of functions. It shows when drums are triggered. Notice the columns flashing. You can navigate through the grid with this little square as a cursor and change parameters. We'll use the control section down below. The parameter encoder will cycle through different parameters. and then the value encoder will change them. The things you can change are timbre, pitch, decay, and level or volume. For timbre, there's 3 colors for indicating 3 different kits, and that's per voice too, so you can mix and match. I'll change them all to 1 color at the same time so that you get a sense of some of the sounds. There's orange for acoustic vibes with pitch and amplitude envelopes and little bits of noise. Blue for lo-fi, bit crushing, more aggressive envelopes and ambient noise. And green for more funky sounds. Oh, and these sounds are all specific for each output. So kicks are kicks, snares are snares, and so on. The rest of the parameters are just 1 bar and 1 color. It's actually the same color of the timbre you selected for your kit, which is a nice touch. Back to the grid, the last function is to indicate the CV assignment. There's 2 CV ins right here, and they'll take plus minus 5 volts. We'll just cycle through to the parameter we want to assign and press the encoder below the input we want to use. Let's do the hats. That square on the grid is now green, meaning it's assigned to CV input 1. Let's patch something into that. Maybe an output from Griffin's Claws, then we can record to modulate it. I'm gonna clock Griffin's Claws while we're at it. Clock. We can assign something to CV2 by going to another parameter and pressing the other encoder. It turns orange, meaning it's assigned to CV2. Let's grab an LFO from Trinity and patch that into CV2. Yeah, like any module, you can dial in what your modulation is going to be or where it's starting from to get the best results. You can long press either encoder to bring up an attenuverter for that parameter. And then if you just dial in the value parameter, you can attenuvert that. I feel like that's a big bonus just to have attenuverting right on the module. Press the same encoder to exit that, and you're back to the grid. From what I can see so far, it seems to maintain within that same kit for your modulation. It doesn't expand outside into a different kit. Here's the cool thing. You can assign as many parameters as you want. Let's do them all. You still have control over this energy. So yeah, things can get a little bit weird and wild if you want them to. It's kind of fun. I'm gonna tone down maybe some of the pitch modulation, but I'm gonna keep patching and we'll see what this turns into. I'll check back and maybe we'll have a jam. I forgot to mention, you can mute any parts of your kit. All you have to do is navigate to that column and then press both encoders at the same time. And then press both encoders again to unmute. Cool, I'm gonna get patching. So that's Rhythmi and Beatsi in a bigger patch. It's kind of refreshing to work with drums this way, getting a full beat going on Rhythmi without too much fuss or thinking about multiple different sequences. It's kind of neat. It's a workflow that I haven't had a chance to work with that much. You can refine your beats, nudge it this way or that, and then you're presented with mostly happy accidents. And then Beatsi's got those modular sounding drums and a small amount of HP. And then normaling makes these two really nice to patch together. Like any module, you can just patch these up face value and then be done with it. Just use the normaling and never look further. But getting creative with your patching will widen your options. Then you can just tailor things to your taste. Think about it as the module is giving you suggestions and you can just overrule it at any time you want. If you want your snares to hit in a particular spot all the time, you can just sequence that on another sequencer and patch that into Beatsi. Or maybe you can't do without that kick drum sample to make your beat sound just right. Just get Rhythmi to trigger that instead and use a dummy cable into Beatsi. Or maybe adding in some switches to swap between what's coming out of Rhythmi and some step sequences is more your thing. All these ideas are helpful in a more performance-oriented patch. I like to think about it as shifting control around your case. When you're patching, you can decide what elements you want more control over and how you want to control them. You can also look for the ways that the modules you have are giving you outputs that are useful for ways that aren't necessarily intended. So for Rhythmi, you can use the triggers to control more of your patch than just drums. I know for me, I tend not to use tom very much in the stuff that I make, but I can definitely repurpose those same triggers and maybe even the CV for really great bass lines. And then let's not forget the hi-hat output. That's both triggers and gates. I could probably use that output to sequence leads. We could also use the hi-hat pattern to trigger the kick, and mix and match other patterns for even more variation and beats and happy accidents. I'll look at some of these ideas in the next patch and see what I come up with. Something else I've been exploring for drums is processing. This is something I know very little about, so I kind of hesitate to get into. I'm not coming from a producer or a DAW background, but this is a learning channel about my modular journey, so here goes. As always, point me in the right direction if I get something wrong. Anyhow, I'm talking about things like compression, limiting, and distortion. Redmeans Recording says drums is way better with effects, and I would happen to agree. But I don't always have an effect in my case that I can run for drums and then have something else for the rest of my patch. Dan from DPW in Sweden recently sent me an L3 limit just to continue along this journey. And I've been playing around with it a little bit. It's a 3-channel limiter. It has a series of soft knees and a gain knob for each channel, so you can just turn up the gain, boosting your signal to hit those soft knees. The result will be more body for things like kick and toms, where you can also crank that gain, causing the signal to break up and distort in really cool ways. So I figured this would be cool to pair with the drum synthesis coming out of Beatsi. So I'll give that a go. All right, here we go. bunch going on in this patch. I have an additional case right here, and that has LX-Euclid, Rample, and Mimeophon in there. Awesome. LX-Euclid is a Euclidean sequencer, Rample is a sample player, and Mimeophon is a really cool delay. This was actually my first module. Okay, let's start with Rhythmi and Beatsi. It's getting clock from noise tools, as is the rest of the case, but there's some really cool ways that I'm breaking the normal in here. So we have the hi-hat output going out to trigger kicks on Rample. I just thought it was a really interesting pattern, and I tend to be pretty particular about my kicks and the way that they sound, so this seemed to be a really good approach for this one. So yeah, it's a little bit of a busier sort of kick pattern, but I like it a lot. I also have the snare sequence going out to trigger the crash on Beatsi, and that's really cool because instead of turning up the energy all the way in order to have a crash, I can sort of dial it in so that I can turn it up a little bit and a crash will happen, and I turn it up a little bit more and crashes will happen more often over the course of the beat. I also have the crash multed and going to the kicks on Beatsi, and I'm using a really long decay on that kick. So it's creating this sort of like thunderous energy on the low end, and then we have the crash, which is a lot of energy on the high end, and yeah, gives you a sense of phasing for the beat. I'm also getting CV offset from Spectral AO1 into Evolve. That's just so that I can see what the knob value is, because this is an encoder and it depends on these lights. Sometimes it's nice to just have a really fast control that you know where everything is. On Beatsi, I'm breaking a bunch of the normaling as well. I have this snare pattern, which is actually coming from LX-Euclid. Just a very simple snare pattern. It's just consistent. Tends to be how I like my snares. If I had a switch in here, it might be really cool to sort of switch back and forth between what the snare or one of these other outputs is doing and the simple snare output, but I don't right now. Okay, simple snare pattern is going to trigger Beatsi, and it's also going to trigger the snare on Rample. The cool thing about that is that you can layer whatever's coming out of Beatsi. If you've created drums in modular, that might be something that you do anyway, or you might be familiar with different synthesizers that might do that. So they use both a synthesized sound and then also a sampled sound. In this case, I'm using the sampled sound so that it's getting some of the reverb from bib, and that's creating a little bit of that room sound that you might get, sort of added that in. Since I'm already using the hi-hat pattern coming out of Rhythmi going to Rample for the kicks, I didn't want to use the same pattern for hi-hat. So on channel A, on Steppy, I have that sequencing the hats. You'll notice here it's not 16 steps, so it's gonna phase in an interesting way. And I also have some ratchets on a couple of those steps. It's not all just consistent 16th notes there. I think I have some probability. I find it helpful to have an interesting sort of a hi-hat pattern that isn't necessarily repeating, just to create some interest in it. The tom is actually being sequenced on channel C of Steppy, and if you notice, these are sort of clustered together, kind of indicating the idea of a roll. The pitches for that are being sequenced from Griffin's Claws, channel 2, and that is going out to Bard Quartet for quantizing, and then going back to the tom CV. I think the length is about 4 sort of snare rolls, so we're getting 4 different pitch patterns as we're going through the different beats. So even though the triggers are all the same, it creates some interest each time it goes by. And then we have some CV modulation coming from the Neo Trinity, going into both CVs, and that's just modulating the decay and level of the hi-hat, bringing some more interest in the hi-hat, offsetting a little bit of the busyness of the kick pattern, and yeah, I thought that was nice. For the rest of the patch, maybe we'll go through the different voices. For the lead voice, we have Banshee Reach going through Centaur's Gates for filtering and VCA, and then that's going into bib. It's actually being mixed with this snare from Rample first in 3x MIA, and then going to bib. And then for the bass, we have Pizza, and that is the main and the octave oscillator going out, mixed with Beatsi and Rample, and then that is going out to Mimeophon. Both of those are mixed up here in the case, and then they're going to the L3 limit for a little bit of compression. So again, L3 limit by dBW, we're getting a little bit of gain, and that's pushing that signal up into a series of softenings. And then from there, it's just an output so we can hear it. We have triple steeple right here doing envelopes for both those voices, exponential envelope for the lead, and we have a linear envelope for Pizza. The envelope for Pizza is being attenuated though, so we're not getting a really big shift in timbre. And that's just modulating the shape So it's really just pushing that sine wave bass into a little bit of the saw wave each time the envelope is triggered. We have the trigger out from barred quartet for every time there's a new bass note, and that's going to trigger triple steeple. When that happens is dependent on a couple things. There's always a pretty slow ARP on channel 4 to create a little bit of a sound of a progression, and that's transposing both the lead and the bass. And I'm also adding in some sequencing from Griffin's Claws, so I change it from direct to a recording here and there throughout the jam. I'm also sequencing the lead on Griffin's Claws as well. And the trigger pattern for that is just coming from Steppy. It's consistent for the whole jam. We have a little bit of a wood knock coming from Rample on channel 4. That's sequenced by LX-Euclid. And I think that's it. I think that's the whole patch. Just goes to show that you can use modules exactly the way that they're listed, or you can choose to sort of break that convention just as long as you understand what kind of signals it's sending out. It's probably worth it to dig in that way. That's Rhythmi and Beatsi. Listening back to the jams, it was really interesting to hear different beats. They definitely have a different flavor than what I usually make. That's thanks to Rhythmi mostly. I'll continue to explore it and throw it in different patches, especially if I'm stuck for beats or want some happy accidents, or if I'm wanting to just turn knobs and change rhythms constantly like in that first patch. If you're looking for a new flavor of pattern generation, it might be worth a shot. Super helpful module, especially if you're less familiar with drumming or making different beats. It can give you a lot of variety and create interest, especially with that syncopation. All without contending with step sequences that don't quite sound right. We've all been there, right? It isn't a magic potion though, so it'll be good to recognize its strengths and lean into them. I feel like I still need to properly explore resets and generate a giant patch, all controlled by Rhythmi. I do think I was able to show a little bit of that power in the beginning of this video though. If I had any feature requests, it would be amazing if you could generate your own bass patterns for Rhythmi, and then branch off with Evolve from there. That way you could start with something that you're familiar with, branch off and explore, and then come back whenever you want. That would probably take a whole bunch of work to make happen, so no qualms if it doesn't. But if you have a Rhythmi and you think it's a good idea, definitely let Omnitone know. Now to drum sounds. Beatsi was fun to mess with. I've had peaks in the past and I did not get along with it for drums. And I've been using samples ever since. But this module definitely makes me want to open up to the opportunity of dedicated drum modules. So I'll probably be exploring that more in the future. If you like modular sounding drums as much as Omnitone loved them, you'll want to check out Beatsi. Plus, if you like processing your drums after the fact, there's lots of fun to be had. I'll definitely be looking out for more drum sounds for Beatsi in the future. It's just a great platform with the grids and the lights, so lots of opportunity there. If I had any complaints, it would be the kick is a little bit low in the mix if there isn't a big pitch envelope or a higher pitch. But then again, I'm coming from a sample workflow where everything is close to the level where you might want to use it. Drum synthesis coming from Beatsi might be a little bit different. However, I imagine this will get a little bit better in future firmware. Both these modules have good control over the things you might want. I especially like how much you have on hand for Rhythmi. Some people might not like the small, tall pots, but I was able to get around them without too much fuss. Plus, using CV inputs means you can use your favorite offset sources. And both modules have tuning calibration that's digital, so that's really helpful. But yeah, overall, some solid modules. If you have any questions about these or anything else in my case, feel free to ask down below. I'm more than happy to banter back and forth about any details. And I'm a big believer in being really thoughtful about your purchases as you're putting together a system. So I'm more than happy to help in any way I can. I'm not going to suggest something just because I have it unless I think that it'll work for your needs and workflow. Anyway, feel free to like and subscribe. I really appreciate the support. If you want to do something a little bit extra for the channel, feel free to buy me a coffee. If you're not familiar with it, Buy Me a Coffee allows you to make a one-time donation to the channel. about the cost of a coffee, just to keep the caffeine flowing and these videos going. I also have a Patreon if you're into the whole monthly thing. I haven't done a whole lot on there, and I think I have about like 1 subscriber. So if you want to jump in and really help shape what's on offer there, feel free. One last thing, I'm dabbling in the idea of lessons. So if you're just starting out in modular and need a little one-on-one guidance, maybe you're working on those first couple patches and having a bit of a hard time, or you're considering getting into modular and want to see what all the fuss is about, find me on Instagram and I can send you a calendar link to book in. And that's it for me. I had a bunch of patches in prep for this video. Let me leave you with one more. Lots more videos to come, at least 3 or 4 in the works right now. Happy Super Booth, which just wrapped up. I really hope to make the trip 1 year. It's becoming a little bit of a life goal to make that happen actually. Maybe next year. Happy patching. So basically what's going on for Rhythmi and Beatsi, we have kick, snare, hats, closed and open, and then we have the tom. The tom is creating like that interesting kind of vibe that everything else sort of like latches onto, and then we have the crash. It's getting help in 2 areas. I'm getting a consistent snare from channel B of Steppy, and that's going into the snare here, and then I'm also quantizing the tom. So tom CV from Rhythmi is going out into Bard Quartet, and that's going back into Beatsi over here, just to be able to transpose it and move it around as the patch changes and I'm sort of cycling through on Bard Quartet. The right channel of Centaur's Gates is acting as an additional sort of oomph for kick. It's more of a zappy sort of kick sound than what Beatsi is producing. That is getting an envelope from Triple Steeple. Part of the jam, it was being triggered by Steppy channel A, and then I moved that over to the kick on Rhythmi, so it's getting triggers from there towards the end of the jam. And then we have bass from Banshee Reach going through Centaur's Gates, the left channel, and I'm sort of changing that throughout. There's some sub going on, which is kind of nice, and then I move it up a higher octave to give it some more energy as the jam's sort of going on. Envelopes are all coming from Triple Steeple. The main pitch sequencing is coming from Griffin's Claw, at least for Pizza. So Pizza is the lead voice. It's getting gate acting in its envelope VCA mode. So this gate is going into the sync in of Pizza, and that's basically triggering it to make sound. The envelope is controlled by this control knob. All the mixing is happening over here on 3X MIA. So I have 4 inputs going in and then out into a dry mix here on this top part that I'm using as a mixer, and that's going into HPO. And then I have 2 channels coming in over here at the bottom of 3X MIA, and that is going out to bib to get reverb, delay, a little bit of drive. Oh yeah, crucial part within this patch is this L3 limiter from DPW. I decided in this patch to split it. So I have the main out coming from Beatsi going into Carbon, and then I have a low pass and a high pass coming out, and then those are getting independent controls here on the limiter. So I'm not pushing those highs as much, so I don't want those to sort of break up, but I'm pushing the lows quite a bit. That's like where the kick is coming from. That is where the added like excitement is coming from the toms. I don't know if I'm doing that right, but it was definitely interesting to try. I also have the out malted and going into this LPG, and then that is just sort of being triggered when the snare is being triggered from this 3rd envelope here. It's sort of catching that snare and making the snare pop out a little bit more. The high pass that's going through the L3 is going into the wet, and the low is not. There's just 3 little sections set up on Bard Quartet. We have channel 4 being triggered from channel C every now and then when the screen light turns red, sort of give everything a little bit more of a progression. So I'm actually not sequencing the bass at all. I'm just letting it drone and then having it set to transpose from the channel 4 that's going into the transpose.